Basically, the idea is that initially in a globalized world where there's a lot of low-cost competition from commoditized service providers, now we're in the AI era where there's even more commoditized help that people can get for $20 a month. We have to find a way as professionals and as business owners to distinguish ourselves and our services in a way so that people understand, okay, this is worth paying for. This is worth paying a premium for. And the reason they will do that is when you are recognized for your expertise. Because number one, they want to have a quality assurance. There are always going to be lower priced options, but if they know just from hearing about something that it is going to be impeccable quality, there are always people who are willing to pay for that because it is simpler.
In today's show, I am delighted to introduce you to the wonderful Dorie Clark. Dorie was named as one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world. She's a consultant and keynote speaker who teaches at Columbia Business School and the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. In a culture that pushes us towards what's easy and glamorous in the moment, Dorie argues for a very different path, doing the small, often unglamorous things over time to achieve real, lasting success. For any of you business leaders out there who are feeling rushed, overwhelmed, and stuck in a cycle of short-term firefighting, this conversation is your way out. As ever, I invite you to go and grab a cup of coffee, a notepad and pen, and enjoy the show. Dorie, you are very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Absolutely delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
You're very welcome. I've been following your work for years, especially your writing in the Harvard Business Review, so excited for this conversation. Look, you know our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Dorie, to kick off the show, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
When I think about scaling with purpose, it's really about setting the intention for what you want your business to be in your life. If you are leading a small or a medium-sized business, your goal is, I'm sure it's partially world domination, but it's not necessarily to go public on a stock exchange or to, get, massive venture capital funding. You have different goals, which is about creating a business that is successful, that's lucrative, that has an impact, but it needs to be tied to your life. You are the creator of this business. And so scaling with impact to me means making the business as big and impactful as it can possibly be with the context and caveat that it's your life and it needs to match what you want it to be in that context.
I love that. And too many founders, certainly that I work with, create businesses that are not working for them, but rather they're working for it and become enslaved to it. So we'll touch on that today. I love your work, as I mentioned at the outset. You're author of 6 books at this stage, 7 books. It's incredible. So this one, The Long Game, is one of my favorites. So I think it's just a really refreshing take, an antidote to what we have right now, which is a short-term thinking culture. And in many respects, the financial industry has driven this, monthly management accounts, quarterly returns, annual compliance submissions. So, you're a young person. So was there a point in your own career or a specific moment that triggered you to move from kind of short-term thinking to this, to becoming a long-term, more strategic thinker? Or did you always think like this?
Well, I think I have always been conceptually willing to make sacrifices for the long term, but for a lot of us, it takes some kind of a inciting incident to really understand how to apply it in our own lives. Because for a long time, I think most of us very optimistically believe that things will take care of themselves. You can keep saying yes, you can do all of the things. You can do the short term and the long term. And eventually you realize that choices have to be made. And then that's the moment, that's the crucible about, well, which will you choose? And so for me, a moment that really stands out was after the release of this book, Stand Out, in 2015. I really wanted to go big with this book. And so I booked 74 talks that year.
Wow.
I was traveling around that is
Wow.
an average of about 1.5 per week. So I was constantly on the road, going places, just trying to get out there, trying to promote the book, which is a useful goal. If you're an author, you do want to promote your book. And I, in my mind, thought, well, I can just do this as much as I need to, and things will fit in and take care of themselves. But what also happened was I was sick that year almost all the time because I was constantly catching colds because I wasn't sleeping. I was on airplanes. My immune system was terrible because I wasn't eating properly. I wasn't exercising properly. All the things that you can imagine as the cascade of pushing yourself too hard. And at the end of the year, it was Christmas time. And I was just sitting there sick again, just like snuffling and feeling kind of miserable, and looking at my apartment in New York City and saying to myself, why am I paying this much to live in New York City when I'm not even ever in New York City? And I thought, okay, I need to come up with something better than this. Not that the talks weren't great because they were fun and I enjoyed each one individually, but in the aggregate, it became a problem. And so that was when I committed to trying to do things that would build scalable passive revenue for me, because I realized that's the long-term investment. If you're doing courses or communities or things like that, things that have royalties, it is not going to pay off in the short term. There's almost always something you can do that will be more lucrative in the immediate. But I needed to build insurance for myself in case I actually ever got really sick or if I got tired of being on this treadmill that I was on.
Makes complete sense. And I just heard the term for what you described from a wonderful guest called Clint Ray. It's called the letdown effect. He's a physical trainer to the armed forces and has trained people in the military and who are performing in elite sports. He's written a wonderful book called The Cognitive Athlete, and this is what happens whenever we're running on high cortisol all of the time. The minute we stop, we get ill. So I always kind of feel that trauma triggers change. The change being, right, we've got to build something that's scalable and delivering for us passive income. You write at the start of the book, everything takes longer than we want it to. Everything. So tell me about this, and especially in the context of scaling leaders who maybe feel a little bit at this moment in time, a little bit disillusioned or dissatisfied that things aren't happening as quick as they perceived.
Yeah, this is such a common problem, and I certainly myself fall prey to it. There is nothing more satisfying than creating something and it's an instant hit. It could be something as small as a social media post that gets a bunch more views and a bunch more comments than you usually have, and you say, "Oh, people loved that." Or it could be something as genuinely helpful to your business as you launch a new offer and everybody signs up and it sells out right away, and it feels so good, like, "Oh, now I have it figured out. Now I understand the market." And then the next time you think, oh, I've got this nailed, and it doesn't go nearly that well. So we have to have a kind of intellectual humility about it, but also recognize the vast majority of the time it's going to be the latter rather than the former. Just statistically, almost no one gets hits all the time. And we might have something that actually is a good idea, but it just takes more time to percolate and to build a following and to become something. And I think it's an important reminder because so often the thing that we as entrepreneurs are afraid of is sticking with a bad thing too long. We get a little gun shy about that. And the truth is, a more common problem is that it's not that it's a bad idea, it's that it just needs more time. It needs more development, either to improve from what you learn from the market, or maybe the market isn't quite ready yet, or maybe you just literally need to build up a network effect with it. And all of those things take time. And so I think what often happens is that we're more liable to abandon a good idea too early rather than too late. I mean, I'm curious, Brendan, how do you see this?
I'll be 51 this year, and I've come to realize that actually to build anything meaningful, it takes decades. It's back to that old cliche. We grossly overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year, but underestimate considerably what we can achieve in a decade. And I always lean on the John F. Kennedy back in 1961 before they had the technology or the wherewithal or any precedent. And he said, by the end of the decade, we'll put a man on the moon. And that became ultimately in May 1969, the first man walked on the moon. And that became the classic moon shot. And I see this consistently within businesses that, they do not tend to achieve what they've set out to achieve in the first 3, 5, 6, 7 years, but certainly when they start to reflect on what they've achieved over the decades, it's much more than what they had anticipated. So it does take that time. That's my experience of it. I think the challenge then is for leaders is discerning between what is a slow start and what actually requires a strategic pivot. So how do you, Dorie, in terms of your own entrepreneurial career and when you're coaching others, support them to make that distinguishing decision of actually we need to change something, or no, look, we're on the right track here, stay the course, it's just taking a little longer?
Yeah, that's always the hard part, right? I talk about this in the long game as entering a tunnel when you are starting to embark upon a long-term goal because you are so optimistic at the beginning and it sounds so good and you enter this tunnel and at the end you're going to come out and you're going to achieve your goal, but the big problem is that no one ever tells you how long the tunnel is. We don't know how long it is. And so, it could be 100 feet, amazing. It could be 100 yards, that's less amazing. It could be 100 miles, and that is really demoralizing. But once you're in, the perspective is very hard because it just looks dark. That's literally all you've got. So I think that oftentimes what we need to do is upstream. It happens before you enter the tunnel of your goal. And that is better scoping. It's understanding what are the milestones along the way that would indicate to me that I am actually making progress. That's the tricky part because if the only metric you're looking at is have I achieved the goal or not, sometimes that can take a really long time. So we need to be more thoughtful about, well, what are preliminary signs? What are leading indicators that we can tap? That's one piece. And then the second piece is related to that. It's research about what have other people's experience been with regard to this, because it is true that your mileage may vary. You might get somewhere faster than someone, slower than someone, but it is unlikely if there is an established goal that you will have such a huge range of deviance. You might get there 20% faster, 20% slower. Unless you were doing something incredibly radically different, it is unlikely that you will get there 10 times faster. And so knowing what other people's experience has been in general will allow you to calibrate your expectations so that okay, if it's 3 months in and you haven't seen much progress, that is okay. You don't need to freak out. You don't need to say that all is lost because most people don't see progress until month 6 or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the analogy of going into a tunnel. We call it the valley of darkness. So, this is an analogy certainly that resonates strongly. You mentioned the leading indicators, you mentioned doing your research up front to get an understanding of how long this might take in the context of managing expectations. How else, Dorie, can we motivate ourselves when we're in this valley of darkness and that little inner voice is being hypercritical about us being in this position? likely saying that we should have achieved this sooner, likely drawing us to comparisons of others who have already achieved what it is we're trying to achieve. You know, what do you do to stay motivated, and what do you advise others?
I think that one of the underrated aspects of being able to stay motivated is actually community. Because these goals, even if you're working on slightly different goals from someone else, being in the process of a journey together is so empowering. And I know for me personally, being able to see examples of peers that are, that are doing it, and sometimes people, I think too much about jealousy, or, oh, you're going to be looking at somebody else. I really see it differently. I think that if you see someone who is coming from a similar place to you and they are succeeding, then that is proof that you can succeed as well. That is proof that that thing can happen. And I think if you're feeling excessively jealous of someone, it's a different problem. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I think that for all of us, we can and should, if we have the right collaborators, feel very excited about seeing what they're doing because we know it's around the corner for us. And I'll give you a personal example. Right now, I am on a mission, and I'm right and this is true, I think, for so many of your listeners. I don't know if this is going to be successful. So I decided at the beginning of the year, I was going to try to master Instagram. I have done a lot of things on, writing books and working a lot on building LinkedIn, things like that. Instagram is not a channel that I have ever focused much time or energy on. I had an account, but it wasn't a cognitive focus of mine. But I decided,
Likewise.
yes, this year I decided, okay, I'm gonna try to really focus. I'm gonna see what I can do with this. And I have heard about colleagues who have really just taken off. And it's amazing to watch that and to really understand. For me, not so much. I'm early into it. I have been studying this pretty extensively for about 3 months. I would say for about 6 weeks, I've now been posting every day and trying to have rigor and trying to reverse analyze what's working, what's not working. I'm applying a level of scrutiny to it that I didn't before. In terms of numbers of subscribers, it's barely budged. I mean, like a couple hundred or something, that's nice, but it is certainly not explosive growth. I am in the tunnel. I am not seeing benefits. I'm spending an inordinate amount of time on it. I mean, there are personal rewards about, like, oh, I'm learning a new thing. That's great. But there's not tangible rewards yet. And so I am really trying to live out the gospel here, because it is my hope that in 6 months or in 12 months, I will have something real and substantive to show for it, where it's like, oh my gosh, it's grown so much. It's, so much more popular than it was. But I don't know that is the case, but I am willing to take that bet.
There's a couple of beautiful frames there in terms of not looking to others who have achieved the success that you want to achieve through kind of green eyes, but as evidence that this can be done, and that clearly there is a method of getting to that level of success, and I just have to work out the method. And secondly, the fact that actually you're affirming to yourself that this is good, I'm learning something new, and you're not caught up on the outcome, but you're actually deeply enjoying the process, is what I'm hearing. Something you say again in your book is the challenge for all of us is an inner one. And it sounds to me like, you're at this point at the moment in the tunnel. So what do you mean by that in the context of scaling?
Yeah. So for me in the tunnel right now, I mean, I'm both relishing the process of, okay, I could be on the precipice of something great here. Like it could be this moment before everything explodes. And that feels very exciting. It feels full of promise. And also equally, I'm grappling with a realization that I'm spending probably, I mean, at least 5 and maybe 10 hours a week working on something that is purely discretionary and might turn out to be a waste of time in terms of results. Like, you think about that, you think about the opportunity cost of it, and it can drive you crazy if you just use the short-term lens and say, oh, but if I had applied that to doing sales calls or something that I know is going to generate a result, then, oh, how stupid that I took that gamble. But there's not right and wrong answers here, but what I can tell you is that if you're applying the time that you have strictly to things that you know will work, then the gains are only ever going to be incremental because it's a thing you know can work. And so presumably you're already doing a lot of it. You're going to, get 5% better, 10% better. That's amazing. That can really help your margins. But if you are in a situation where you want something different, if you want something exponential, you actually need to invest your time in speculative things because those are the ones that have transformative potential. And they also might not work, but that's the bet we have to make.
Is that the prize? We're having a conversation here, and we're making the assumption that actually the long game is the right game versus the short game. But what does the research tell us? I mean, you've suggested that it's only by focusing on the long game can we actually get realize exponential results and realize true transformation. What else, in terms of your own experience and kind of leaning on the research that you've done, why the long game over the short game?
So you're asking the right question, Brendan, which is that I want to drill down on the fact that the long game isn't always the right decision, honestly. Now, this is great that you're speaking to an audience of small and medium sized enterprises because typically these are folks who are entrepreneurs and or at least have a large degree of control in their company. And that is great because you have the ability to play the long game in a way that sometimes people who might be, working for a large corporation, presumably they're not even, even the CEO isn't an owner, right? They're reporting to shareholders, to boards, to things like that. There are constraints that are faced. Whereas if you are running the show, you get to decide, okay, are we going short term? Are we going long term? So having the autonomy to make that choice is really critical in the beginning. But also, the piece that is really important is understanding where you are in your business life cycle. Because if you are just starting out, the thing that matters the most, of course, is cash flow. It's staying alive for another day. It is making sure you have the margins necessary to be able to make strategic bets. I would never want someone who is, trying to make payroll to do something, big and risky and grand. That is literally just gambling. That's not a strategic bet. That's just saying, oh, let's see, let's hope it works. That's not very responsible. But what I will suggest is that if we are, in my opinion, doing it right, it is getting enough security for yourself and your business through careful bets, through focusing on tried and true things that you have a margin to play with. And then when you have that margin, it is strategically utilizing a portion of that. And that margin could be time, that margin could be money, but it is deploying those assets toward the long term rather than the short term.
That makes complete sense. Something you advise leaders is creating white space in our calendars. What do you mean by that, Dorie? And why is this important in the context of the long game and achieving something transformational and something exponential?
So white space factors into this, and literally when I say white space, I just mean space in your calendar, free time. It's time that is not covered in the blue ink of your calendar meetings. And the reason that we need that is that if you are constantly busy, if every slot really is full, you will always be almost definitionally in execution mode because you have so much to execute on. You have to go from this meeting to this meeting to this meeting. Maybe if you get a little free time, oh, I promised to send him that thing. Let me send him that thing. And it keeps you in a state of flurry when actually, if you are going to be making strategic choices and strategic decisions, you need to step back from that enough to ask yourself the question, all these meetings, all of these tasks I have for myself, are they still the right thing? Are they still the best use of my time? because taking just a little time to step back might actually eliminate 10% or 20% or 30% of those things because they no longer suit your business model or they no longer are the best use of your time. I mean, I'm curious, how do you think about white space, Brendan? Do you try to prioritize that, or how does that play out for you?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm a big advocate of Jesse Itzler's big ass calendar. It's actually on my gym wall, and at the start of every year, I block out. I was just having a conversation with Robert, producer, before we came on air about having a mini break every month. So I'll go away. I'll travel away somewhere. Tomorrow I'm heading away to Spain on a cycling trip, and so every month I will deliberately and plan that in first. In terms of the white space, what I do on a monthly basis is plan in thinking days, and I tend to head out into nature, up the mountains. Um, Try not to have my phone during those times. I'll head out with the dog or whatever. More regularly on a daily basis, after lunch, I tend to now, if I'm in the office, I'd go out and take a walk in nature without a phone, without even listening to podcasts. And I'm a big fan of listening to podcasts. So I'm a huge fan of actually, and again, it's taken me kind of 5 decades, 3 decades in business to actually get to the point where I go, actually, this is where the real value lies. As a leader, it's we get rewarded for our thoughts and how we then direct those thoughts as opposed to what we do. No one else, and I always advocate to our CEOs in our program that actually there's no one else thinking about your business. So if you're not taking that time out, if you're not creating that white space to think about your business, who is? Because what you'll end up is waking up in 3 years, 5 years, bemoaning the fact that you've ended up here and you didn't want to end up here. And my question is, well, where did you want to end up? And at what point did you take the time out to think about where you wanted to end up? So this resonates strongly, Dorie.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that.
So do you advocate, like, on a daily basis, like literally from a practical perspective, time blocking out this white space? Do you have, like, if we checked your calendar now, you have these half an hour blocks out on a daily basis or weekly basis, or practically what does it look like?
So, depending on your tasks, you can do it differently. For me personally, the way that I like to structure my calendar is actually more by days. And the reason, like entire days. And the reason I do this is that a lot of the work that I do requires a fairly deep amount of concentration. I'm working on two different books right now. And something that I have learned about a project like that, where you're trying to write, 300 pages worth of material, is that it's very different than writing an article. When you write an article, if you have an hour, you can probably do it because you're starting fresh. You're like, what should I say? Okay, da, 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 you get it done. With a book, you have to, or any kind of longer term project, you have to reorient yourself. What have I done before? Where do I want to go? How does this piece fit into it? And the cognitive switching costs are high. And so therefore, it is exponentially better for me to have a half day than it is an hour. And it's even better to have a full day as compared to a half day. So for my calendar, what I generally try to do nowadays is leave Mondays and Fridays free of meetings. And they are just blank days where if I want to go deep on a project, I do that. And, it leaves room for emergencies or things you need to do. Sometimes I'll end up with a doctor's appointment on a Monday or a Friday if I can't get it another time. I'm okay with that because that's me baking in margin. But typically that's the scenario. And so, as with today, we're recording this on a Tuesday. Tuesday through Thursday are my more meeting days. And so that's when I am accomplishing new things, short term things. I also have rules for myself there too. I don't ever, unless it's a sort of an emergency situation where I've had to slot something in. I don't ever have back-to-back meetings. I try to have at least a 15-minute break, ideally a 30-minute break in between, so that if I've promised to do something, it doesn't plague me by getting to the bottom of my to-do list, but instead I can do it right after the meeting. So that's a way of trying to keep my cognitive slate clean.
Yeah, I love that. And again, it's aligned to the advice from Clint Ray. Again, I'll bring Clint's work up in terms of becoming that cognitive athlete, building in that buffer time between he talks about the four aspects of periodization: conditioning, transformation, performance, and recovery, and that recovery on a daily basis between meetings. So again, aligns beautifully. Something you referenced earlier, you held up your book Stand Out, and you write extensively on, this concept of being a recognized expert, and certainly it aligns with that, achieving those goals, those long-term goals, is contributed by becoming a recognized expert. For our listeners, and especially those leading small and medium-sized businesses, does it have relevance? And what is it? And does it have relevance? And then we kind of do a deeper dive on this.
So when I talk about becoming a recognized expert, and that's a concept I've been working on for a long time. I've been running for the past decade an online course and community called that. Um, Basically, the idea is that initially in a globalized world where there's a lot of low cost competition from commoditized service providers. Now we're in the AI era where there's even more commoditized help that people can get for $20 a month. We have to find a way as professionals and as business owners to distinguish ourselves and our services in a way so that people understand, okay, this is worth paying for. This is worth paying a premium for. And the reason they will do that is when you are recognized for your expertise. Because number one, they want to have a quality assurance. There are always going to be lower priced options, but if they know just from hearing about something that it is going to be impeccable quality, there are always people who are willing to pay for that because it is simpler. It means you don't have to do it a second time, a third time. It will be done right from the beginning. And number two, when you are recognized for your expertise, you actually can have it, if you do it right, a strong enough brand that your brand shines a positive association on the person consuming it. That is why people buy a Mercedes or a BMW or whatever fancy car. And similarly, in our own spheres, many people are proud to say, "Oh, well, I work with these people. I work with this person. I work with this company." I work pretty closely with Marshall Goldsmith, the well-known executive coach, and he always, would be sort of trotted around by his clients, saying, "This is my coach, Marshall Goldsmith." And sometimes back in the day, people were embarrassed to have a coach because it was branded as a remedial thing. But for Marshall Goldsmith, people said proudly, "No, no, this is my guy." And I think that when we ascend to that level, where people are proactively being proud to associate with us, it means that you are relatively bulletproof in terms of your position in the market, your prices, and your ability to continue attracting clients.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I had the wonderful Alan Mullally on the podcast, the former president of Ford Motor Company, the first non-Ford family member to ever become the president. And he told me on the podcast that his coach was Marshall Goldsmith, and actually made the introduction to Marshall Goldsmith. So to your point, he
There we
was very
go.
proud of the fact that his coach was Marshall Goldsmith, and actually credits Marshall with many of the wonderful decisions that he made in relation to Ford's transformation. So just in staying on that theme for a moment, becoming the recognized expert, how do we deal with the tension between you going out there as the founder or leader of this business and the business itself, the brand of the business itself? How do we make sure that kind of both internally and externally there isn't a perceived conflict, that kind of this guy's looking, this girl's looking all the headlines, but at the same time, in some way, the company brand is not getting the same level of attention. How do we deal with this so actually 1 + 1 here equals 3 or 30 even? How do we create this multiplier effect by actually creating our own brand as founders or leaders?
Yeah, and you're putting your finger on something important, Brendan, which is that for people who are operating a company, who aren't a one-man shop, you do have to be mindful of this because if you are perceived publicly as being so critical to the enterprise that it couldn't possibly function without you, that's not a good thing. It means the company is not very saleable because you would always have to be attached to it. So what is better, and I think the place where it really can complement is understanding a couple of things. The first is that, sure, as the owner, as the founder, people want to talk to you. That's important. But ideally, you would be one among many of experts. It's about having the attitude of uplifting people within the company that everyone as part of their company function can become recognized for their expertise. And so encouraging people within the organizational structure, we should all be putting out proposals to speak at conferences. We should all be trying to get quoted in the paper or writing articles for the local business journal or whatever it is. Because if we are seen across the board as being a place where knowledgeable, well-respected professionals congregate, that is going to attract more talent to us, and it's going to redound to the benefit of the company. And everybody does have expertise. I mean, within a company, you've got your supply chain person, you've got your product design person, you've got your marketing person, your salesperson. They all have wisdom to contribute to the public sphere. And when multiple of you are doing it, you no longer stand out as the founder. You are one among many of an elite organization that has the best people in the industry. So I think that's one piece of it. And, related to it is telling the story of the expertise of your company. You're not just hiring anybody, right? Presumably you are seeking to hire people who have specialized expertise. And so when you draw that out and draw attention to it, it can become a selling point and a reason why people are trusting you. I mean, you think about, something like, the kind of classic, like, oh, Volvo, it's very safe, whatever. Well, a really easy thing to do is, how do you elevate the science around that? Oh, you're telling me it's safe. Well, what does that look like? Tell me about the tests. Tell me about the safety engineers. Tell me about how many crash test dummies you killed in the process of making this. I want all the gory details because the more proof I have, the more my cynicism as a customer abates and I understand, oh, they mean it. Oh, this is actually different. And one more, you might say, well, but we aren't actually doing something so different than other people. Great, amazing. That's okay too. There's a famous story in marketing about a beer company, and they had a new marketing person come through, and this marketing person did something a little different, where they said, "Okay, show me how it's made. I want to understand the process." So they go through the tour, and we see everything. And they're like roasting the hops and doing this and that. And the person says, "My God, you're toasting the hops to a certain temperature." And the brewers are like, yeah, that's what you do. That's what everyone does. That's not special. And the marketing guy said, "You know what? People don't know that." And so they did a whole campaign about we're toasting our hops to this, temperature. And then we carefully do this and that. And the public was transfixed because guess what? They'd never heard about that. And it was a sign of interest and expertise and care. And it carries. So there's a lot of benefits.
Yeah, I love that. We were speaking before we kicked off about your time in Ireland and the Guinness tour. I mean, that tour is essentially an immersive way of experiencing the Guinness story. I've been to the Johnny Walker factory in Scotland a number of times. In fact, I went once with friends and I was totally blown away by actually the immersive story and the way they tell that in the factory that I took my entire team back there then for a planning session. There was some whiskey drank as well, which was useful for the planning. But that, yeah, look, that this makes sense. I suspect you see this in your community all of the time because I see it in the community that of founders and leaders that we coach. It's the imposter syndrome. It's the fear of judgment for putting yourself out there, for putting yourself onto social media. I mean, you've talked about really locking in to Instagram, to dial up your presence there on Instagram, and that just seems very natural for you, Dory, as you said. I suspect for a lot of the founders and leaders that you're dealing with, this is alien to them. They don't want to put themselves out there on LinkedIn for that fear of criticism or how it would be judged both internally and externally. Is that something that resonates? And what would you advise to our listeners who are listening to us? What would you advise them to do in order to take kind of the first step here? And what's the prize at the end of this?
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. There's a lot of important stuff in there to unpack. The first one is I just want to push back ever so gently on the idea that, this is natural for me. I have been speaking and doing things like that for a while now, but nonetheless, Instagram, like any new thing that you do, has its own challenges. I will give you an example. For Instagram, unlike LinkedIn, where it's just sort of this scroll, right? Instagram has a sort of page where people can see all of the posts very easily laid out in a grid. And so there's a kind of key card that people look at where it's like the title card. And so we started doing this, and my chief of staff, who has video editing experience but was not a professional video editor, was doing them for me. And yeah, he was doing a good job. He was trying hard, but I'm fairly animated when I speak, and I was making crazy faces. And so he was just like, well, guess we'll use a crazy face. And the first, I don't know, 10 were basically me with my mouth in various shapes that resembled an orangutan's. So I looked preposterous. And there were ones with my eyes half shut. I mean, and so finally I had to tell him, I'm like, we can't have this. Like I have to look, I don't know, friendly or something, and or at least not insane. And so we worked out some strategies, but it was more important in the scheme of things to get going and to practice and to try and to put some topics out there just to get the wheels greased. Like, okay, I can do a daily cadence. Let's give it a try. So it can be difficult because looking at that, it's straight up like yes or no. Like, yes, it's embarrassing. They're embarrassing photos, but also in the greater good of doing it versus not doing it, you just have to make peace with it. But literally, I've had conversations with people in my life, and they will talented, smart people, and they will say things like, well, I can't do that until I lose 5 pounds. I'm like, what? And they're like, well, I look too heavy right now. And so I need to wait and I need to lose 5 pounds. And then I will be ready to dot, dot, dot. And so many of us have things like that. And it's just, you know what? Are you going to wait forever? I mean, I'm not saying you're not going to lose 5 pounds, but like, how long is that going to take? Because when you lose the 5 pounds, then it's like, oh, but then I need to, do my hair a different way or, whatever. We need to do it and understand that there will be some degree of embarrassment for all of us. I get dark circles under my eyes all the time. I mean, however much I sleep, this is just a genetic thing. I get dark circles all the time. It doesn't look great, but I'd rather do it than not do it.
I love that. And ultimately, what have you seen? Like, is the prize for people? Because what I'm hearing is it's the start that stops most people. The excuse making, the reasons why now is not a good time. But when you reflect back, when you kind of overcome that little inner voice, that doubter, that voice that's encouraging you to procrastinate for another little while, you what ultimately what has been the prize for you when you've kind of just leaned into all of these things that initially presented some level of resistance?
Well, I think the prize at the end of it is that you actually have done it and you have some data and you have some result. And sometimes that result is good. Sometimes that result is what you want it to be. The truth is, it's very hard to get any kind of an accomplishment if you don't ever begin it. And almost inevitably, you will improve through doing it. And the thing that you did at the start will embarrass you. Even if you were proud of it at the beginning, it will embarrass you because you're much better now. I mean, I look back at articles that I wrote when I was starting to write articles in 2008 or 9, and they weren't good. I mean, they were grammatical, I guess, but they were not that insightful. It was just like 101 level, super basic stuff, nothing new. And I look at that, I'm like, oh, that wasn't very sophisticated. But, it was what I was capable of at the time, and it is what allowed me to progress. So I think we need to be a little bit more forgiving of ourselves in that way. And also, I think what is powerful is understanding that it's really not the end of the world. I mean, I'm not saying that trolls on YouTube or something won't insult your wardrobe or your appearance or whatever. The truth is that that does happen sometimes. It doesn't happen very much. Certainly, when you're building, most people aren't even paying attention. So odds are there won't be very much of it. But 1 in 100 times, 1 in 1,000 times, you might get something critical. But we just have to keep it in mind. Like, literally, who has time to be trolling other people when they're successful? Literally, besides Elon Musk and Donald Trump, is there anyone else who actually has power and influence that trolls people for fun? No, in the history of the world, I don't think so, because they're too busy doing things. And so I think we need to just keep in mind that the people who are trolling you are actually people who don't have anything going on themselves.
Here, here. Profound advice. I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you are part of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches Network, which is an incredible network, a network where we connected, and uh, the there's no agenda in that network whatsoever, and it's something you speak extensively on, which is again the no agenda networking. When did you kind of come to this realization? Because I think for a lot of SME leaders, number one, networking's a bit cringy. And we've had people on the likes of Kingsley Aikens, who speaks extensively to the power of networking, but also how cringy it actually is for lots of SME leaders. But the no agenda networking, surely this is a no-no, because actually, we're wrestling with time. We're really, really busy. If there's no agenda, why would I invest the time? So tell me a little bit about that, because even, the networking events that we do kind of wrench ourselves out of our day to day to go to. There's always a clear agenda as to why we're going. We're going to meet, Bill or Joe or Dorie, and I want to get 5 minutes with them, and this is what I'm going to come away with. So, talk to me about the no agenda networking, and what's the agenda of having the no agenda networking philosophy?
Yes. I think that these concepts are tied together very tightly, and it's important to sort of recognize that, because there is a reason why most SME leaders find, or most people in general, find networking cringy. And the reason is that their definition of networking is meeting people so that they can get something from them. And of course, right? That's inherently cringy. Of course. That's not how we want to be as people. Is like, I want a thing, I'm going to get a thing. And so it feels bad because it is bad. So what I would say is don't do that. I think that what we need to separate out is that networking should be something different. Of course, there are times as a business owner that you need to get things, but that is a really different scenario. You need to get things from people who know you and you have a relationship with them and you can get that thing. Maybe they want to buy something from you. Maybe they know someone who wants to buy something from you. That's great. But if you are meeting a stranger, a complete stranger, that is not the person that you should be trying to get a thing from. It is too soon in the relationship. It's jumping the gun. Now, I'm not saying that there's not, this sort of lightning strike of, oh, I sell insurance. Oh my God, I need insurance. But the truth is, most people don't that moment need insurance. And so, as we're thinking about this question of short term versus long term, I like to think of it as the spectrum of sales and marketing. Yes, you need sales, you need business in the here and now. That is what you do with people who know you and people that they can introduce you to, and maybe targeted other things like advertising or whatever. Marketing is the thing that you do so that you get clients 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. It is a different cycle. It is a slower cycle, and that is where networking should be. And we need to treat it appropriately, because if you try to treat networking like a sales function rather than a marketing function, you are going to disappoint yourself and everybody else, because you're going to come on too strong and blow it up.
There's a number of things that come into my head from kind of the conversation that we're having, and I came to your work first of all because of the content. You were very self-deprecating there when you said, "I wrote these articles years ago." I love your articles that weren't that sophisticated. I think your work's incredible, and I encourage everyone to. And we'll put a link to your work after this, but encourage everyone who isn't aware of Dorie Clark to get familiar with your work. You're a master content creator, both in terms of written articles, your books, what you're putting online. For those coming to this for the first time, what would you advocate that they do? Having listened to this podcast, and certainly this is a theme that comes up time and time again. We're, over 200 episodes in at this stage, and it is a recurring theme. What would you advise our SME leaders to do, something that kind of maybe 20% of what they could devote their time to, which would leverage maybe 80% of the results in the context of what they're trying to do from a scaling perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. What is that 20% that makes a difference? And if we go back to playing the long game, I think that one of the most useful things we can do, it's not that strategic thinking takes a really long time. It generally doesn't. It's not that you have to, go away for 6 weeks and have a meditation retreat or something like that. It's really just about pulling back strategically enough so that you can ask a few useful questions that hopefully, if you do it right, will make everything else easier. And so something that I find helpful is just at the end of every work week to have a brief review period. Maybe it's even just 20 minutes, looking ahead to the calendar for the next week and asking yourself some upstream questions. Number one, are you signed up for things that are no longer appropriate or that you don't even know why you're there? And can you get out of them? Because you can often save yourself a couple of hours right there by saying, I don't actually need to be in that meeting. Or wait, I should at least ask her why I'm in that meeting because I don't know. And that can be very valuable. It is also true that upstream, you can say, all right, I am having this meeting on Wednesday. So, I need to get this thing done on Monday. Otherwise, the meeting is going to be completely unproductive. So, if I'm going to make use of that time, here's what I need to do first and to get that done. So, it allows you to triage and allows you to be better prepared so that you can extract the value you need and you don't have to repeat or duplicate work. So those things alone will actually make you much better at your job and much more efficient by just having a very simple week ahead look, and then at like the last of the month or whatever, you can have a month ahead look, just to make sure that sort of detritus hasn't started clinging to your calendar.
Before we move into the close and wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to speak to in relation to becoming a longer term thinker? Is there anything that we haven't covered off today that you feel that we've missed, that leaders should be very aware of and action on?
Well, one concept that I talk about in the long game that I think is particularly useful for busy leaders is recognizing the heads up, heads down philosophy, which is that we need to know consciously which zone we're in, because it is very, very easy for most of us to get trapped in heads down mode where we're just executing. And for at least a minority, it's very easy to always be in heads up mode where we're just, oh, shiny object, new thing. Oh, how wonderful. And then we never actually get to the execution. It is not a good idea for any leader to be only one thing or another. You have to cycle through those phases of heads up and heads down, because if you don't, you risk either executing without knowing it's the right thing to execute on, which is bad, or you risk being so head in the clouds that you never get anything done, which is also bad. So flexing the muscle and saying, all right, consciously, where am I choosing to be? Where does my team need me to be right now? That will make your life a lot easier.
And it's fair to say that creating white space is more consistent with having your head up than having your head down. So I love that, and I'm glad I asked that question. That's a very simple concept for people to wrap their heads around and to understand, and also a question to ask ourselves. I feel at the end of every day and at the end of every week, how much time have I spent in heads up versus heads down? So, Dorie, I close the show with this question to all of my guests. You've an incredible network. You've traveled the world speaking. You've authored incredible books. Can you share with our audience three timeless takeaways?
All right, Brendan, I'll give it a go. So the first one is being very intentional about your environment. I think most people in the entrepreneurial space have heard the well-known Jim Rohn quote about you are the average of the five people you surround
Yeah, I
yourself
love
with.
that.
It's a great quote, but what's interesting, and soon I'll be talking about this on my Instagram channel as well, is that there's actually really interesting research that backs it up in terms of a phenomenon known as social contagion. That people who are healthier tend to have healthier friends, and people who are happier tend to have happier friends. This is not because, oh, I'm healthy, I'm hanging out with my gym buddies. It actually is a causal effect that they've been able to tease out. And so you are influencing and being influenced by the people around you. So being thoughtful about that, I think, is really crucial. Another concept from the long game that I'll share, the second one, is the concept of optimizing for interesting, which is, I think, the key, hopefully, to a good life, which is that when we have discretion in the choices that we're making, we should try, whenever possible, to choose deliberately the more interesting option, because that keeps our life going in the direction we want. It keeps things fresh. And also, it's very hard. It's actually a high bar to say, well, am I making the right choice? Am I making the perfect choice? Am I making, the thing that fits with my calling or my passion? Who knows? Who knows the answer to that? But you can definitely tell right off the bat, is this at least interesting? So I think that is a bar that can be very useful for us to use. And the third piece that I will talk about, also from the long game, is the concept of strategic patience. And that is something that is interesting to me because I have always had a hard time with it. From the time I was young, I kept hearing from my parents and people around me, just be more patient, be more patient. And I wasn't good at it. I think most entrepreneurs are not. But what I have been able to make peace with, and the way that I've kind of come to patience, is understanding that there's a difference between what I will call regular patience and strategic patience. And regular patience, I would say, still remains kind of BS. I don't like it. I think mostly it is an excuse for people to put you off, to say no to you without saying no to you, and to just ignore your requests. But strategic patience is the willingness to understand that there are times where structurally something will take a while. This is sort of the equivalent of like the crops are going to grow as fast as the crops grow. And no matter what you do, you can't influence it. But if you are patient and you recognize, all right, this is what it's going to take, then you are the person who, unlike everyone else that is so short-term oriented, can get to the result. So those are my three takeaways.
I love those. Thank you. So profound. Dorie, look, you continue to put so much value out into the world. What is next for you?
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Brendan. I am working on a book which has not been officially announced yet, but it is about coaching. It is about the practice of coaching, and it will be coming out in the fall of 2027. So I can give more details later on, but I'm very excited to be in that space and to be working on those questions because it's been a little while since I've done a book, so I'm back in the thick of it.
Good on you. Well, I wish you every success with that, and hopefully we get an opportunity to get you back on whenever you've written that. I look forward to reading it whenever it's launched. Dorie, if anyone wants to connect with you, to reach you, how best to find out more about your work and to get in touch?
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. You can check out more than 700 articles that I've written over the years. Some of them better than others, but I think the new ones are pretty good. For places like Harvard Business Review and Forbes and Fast Company, on my website at dorieclark.com. And I will also suggest for people who are interested in the conversation around strategic thinking in the long game, I have a long game strategic thinking self-assessment, and you can download that for free at dorieclark.com/the long game to help you become a better strategic thinker.
Brilliant. Well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Dorie, I want to thank you. I know it's early in Miami at the moment. I want you show up with so much energy. You've imparted so much wisdom. I don't know how you actually deliver the amount of stuff that you deliver out there that is so valuable. 700 articles. I thought I'd read a lot of your stuff. I'm literally only touching the surface whenever you say I've written 700 articles. Look, I wish you every success with the new book and look forward to staying in touch. Dorie, take care.
Brendan, thank you so much.